Hello and welcome to Theology Thursdays. I'm Grace. I'm one of the Faith in Action project workers at SCM.
And hello, my name is Naomi. I am the other Faith and Action Project worker here at SCM.
And joining us today, we have Ruth Wilde from Inclusive Church. And she's going to be talking with us about neurodiversity in church spaces.
That's the one.
So yeah, gonna have a good chat about inclusivity and how to make churches more open to people with especially sensory difficulties, I think. Yeah, to start us off, Ruth, would you like to tell us a little bit about what Inclusive Church does and what your role there is?
Sure. So I'm Ruth Wilde. I'm the national coordinator of the charity Inclusive Church. So I'm the only paid employee and I'm 3 days a week. So you can imagine it's quite a busy job for the 3 days a week. There's quite a lot of kind of emails and lots of different things that we're doing. So an Inclusive Church focuses on inclusion across the board, and it's an educational charity. So there's kind of main things that we're intersectional, and it's education. And also the other things to remember is that although it started off Anglican, it's now ecumenical. So these are some of the most important things. And when I say intersectional, I mean, that we work on inclusion with churches. So from like disability inclusion, which includes, neurodivergence, neurodiversity. And I also get mixed up with those two. When do you use which one? I don't know. And, across to ethnicity, we've done some really great, like Black theology, not podcast, like videos like this. And, across to sexuality, we work with lots of partners. That's another big thing that we do, is that we work with partners and volunteers across the country as well. So these are the kinds of ways that we can have the biggest reach possible, is through volunteers, because I'm only 3 days a week, and through partnerships. So we have a big partnership, for example, with St Martin in the Fields Church on the Disability Conference every year. We have partnerships with, with you. You have someone on our board, SCM. Also Open Table, Modern Church. We often partner with people at Greenbelt Festival, for example. So a lot of that kind of thing going on.
All right, that's really impressive. I don't think I realized quite how much you were involved in. Yeah, I guess, Naomi, do you have our next question?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mentioned SCM as well, that link is there, because you as well have a bit of history with SCM. You used to work for SCM, so it would be great for us just to hear just a little bit more about that, and also just a bit more about the relationship that Inclusive Church has with SCM and that kind of thing.
Sure. So we haven't always had somebody on our board, but at the minute we have kind of about 4, I think, charities that are partner charities that actually have a place on our board. So they have voting rights. They're a trustee, they're a partner trustee, and one of them is an SCM trustee. It was Josh Mock, and he's just left, and I can't remember the name of the new one because I haven't actually met them yet. So yeah, that's kind of in transition. But my role at SCM was actually your roles in a way, because I was Faith in Action project worker. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. And I was 4 days a week. So I was kind of, I don't know how many days a week you two are, but probably kind of your roles combined. You're 3 days. There's actually, you're doing more work than I did on my own. But I would probably do similar things to you. I would visit student groups and do theology and faith in action, campaigning, workshops and things with them. Write lots of stuff as well, blogs and things like that, get people thinking. So yeah, that was kind of what I did. Moved to Birmingham, which is where we're still living because of SCM for the job. So it was a great job. It taught me a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. It is really cool to be like interviewing somebody who had our job previously and is now doing something like sort of even cooler. Um,
Well, it was a great privilege to work with young people, actually, because, you know, young people, I mean, this is a huge generalization, but like quite open-minded, quite kind of generally more progressive, quite pushing at the boundaries. You know, it's just something about being young, and it's just exciting to work with young people, I think. The passion, the kind of the way they get intersectional inclusion, you know, all of that was really, really instructive, really good for me going forward onto this job.
that's awesome. Okay, so why is supporting neurodivergent people in the church so important? Why have we decided to bring you on to a podcast to talk about this?
Yeah. So yeah, so the whole neurodiversity. I think the way that we do it is that neurodiversity is the whole thing and neurodivergent is the person. I think that's what it is. But I do get a bit mixed up as well sometimes. But including neurodivergent people is basically the same as why we need to include everyone, really, as the first step. You know, it's just because including everyone is what makes the church the church. We can't be the church unless we include everyone, because God calls everyone. And if we're blocking people from answering that call, if we're making things harder, we've got barriers in place for all sorts of things, not just getting in and joining in, but also leadership and all sorts of things like that. If you're putting barriers in place for disabled people, you know, people, LGBT people, etc., and including neurodivergent people, it's just not being the church. You're poorer for it, and you're not doing what, you know, it's going against what God wants, which is to include everyone. That's what I think. Also, I just think that it's the heart of the gospel. So you know, we can look back, and I could give stories in here, but we might not have time for that really. But you know, illustrations from the Bible, from the Gospels. But yeah, Jesus' example is not just about including; it's like beyond inclusion. It's about not just bringing people in, but centering marginalized people's experiences. Again and again, this happens, kind of putting them at the top of the table, like lifting people up that haven't been, and even as one friend of mine put it, not just centering, but moving the margins to the center. So like making that the center. So that's, as I see the gospel, I just think it's the heart of the gospel. I think when people think it's a kind of add-on inclusion, I'm like, no, literally, for me, you can't do the gospel and you can't do Christianity unless you take inclusion seriously. So that's, yeah. And if I can just quote somebody, because I've been writing notes before this, and I wanted to just quote somebody for this as well, which is, and I hope I say his name right, a theologian called R.S. Surgitaraja. You heard of him? So he wrote a book called Voices from the Margins. And he said, the more diversity around the table, the more likely it is we will hear what the Spirit is saying. Because if you don't include everyone's voice, you're not going to get the vast diversity of God's creation in there in your church. So it's really, really vital for our churches and for the health of our churches that we include everyone.
That is an awesome answer to a not particularly good question. So
I do have notes here.
No, that is, no, it's beautiful, and I think it also resonates so much with SCM's ethos as well. You know, bringing the marginalised right into the centre of the gospel, and also centering people's experiences as well as part of understanding how the gospel is relevant today. I think is really important. And kind of leading on to that, I was wondering, is someone who is neurodivergent yourself, how, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing some of your own experiences of being in religious spaces and ways that you found people were able to accommodate you, or other ways that you feel that people should have accommodated you.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about my experience of church, it goes right back to my childhood. So my dad is a retired Methodist minister, so he had church as we moved a lot. And my experience of church growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, yes, I know I'm old, was that it was, well, it was not at all LGBT friendly, in that, like, that the majority view was not that it was not okay to be A and stuff. They didn't even talk about trans people. So it's very different to the church now, where I truly think that the majority of mainstream churches now, the majority of people in the pews are not anti-LGBT, even if the church takes forever sometimes, or some church denominations take forever to change. So that's, like, you know, one way in which I was different. That doesn't relate to the ADHD, but it was one thing I experienced growing up. The other thing I do remember is this kind of the kind of churches that we went to. Some of them were kind of more traditional, kind of, I don't know, middle of the road Methodist churches with hymns and stuff. But some of the stuff I went to as a young person, because it was like youth events, was quite overwhelming when I think back. Because I think somebody that's neurodivergent, maybe not everyone, but often we get kind of overwhelmed with too much noise and too much sound. Like, sound isn't the same as noise, Ruth. You know what I mean? Lights and lots of things going on. And so I found that quite overwhelming. I also often felt like excruciatingly shy. I'm not really a shy person. Like, people find it really weird when I say that I'm an introvert or I'm shy and stuff. But as a child, I think I just felt so different. And I think a lot of younger churches with younger people were quite cliquey. And so I just remember feeling quite left out. And I think that might be partly due to being neurodivergent now when I think back to it, because I just didn't really fit in very well. And also added to that, then you get the rejection sensitivity syndrome, which is quite common with ADHD, which is like, not only are you feeling left out, but you also feel really, really rubbish about it because you feel like everyone hates you. So so yeah, that's the things I remember growing up. Yeah, and nowadays, I mean, I'm much more comfortable in general, I think, especially kind of because now I know about diagnosis and everything, and why I struggle with certain things, and why I'm good at certain things as well, which we'll come to, I'm sure. But yeah, I do kind of, in my job, most of the time I'm in churches which I find like quite kind of easy to be in. Sometimes I will be in like one of these kinds of more loud churches, which a lot of people love, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I will find that slightly overwhelming. But I think it helps that I have a role. This is something that I've discovered as I've got to know myself better, is that actually I find small talk actually a lot harder, and it takes a lot more energy for me to concentrate, to focus, to kind of, yeah, it's more stressful for me. Whereas if I've got a role and I'm preaching somewhere, I actually feel much more comfortable. I'm not nervous of speaking in front of lots of people. It's very strange. But I'm very nervous sometimes in that kind of one-to-one, or like more nervous, not very nervous. You know, I am old as it were, so I've got kind of used to doing these things. I'm 40 now, so yeah. So yeah, but I kind of have adapted well to it, but I definitely feel more comfortable having a role, for sure. So I think that helps me. And obviously in my own life, I have chosen churches that suit me, I guess. I guess that's what you do in the long run, isn't it? When you get to know yourself quite well, you naturally go into churches that fit you, with this way of worshipping that suits you. And a lot of people actually that have ADHD but have more of the hyperactive part struggle with Quaker meeting, whereas I find it really helpful because I've got more of the internal brain hyperactivity and it actually settles it. So I find the silence really helpful. And like I do mindfulness as well, which I find really helpful as well. So some people that are more of the hyperactive and need to get up find it really hard to sit still in Quaker meeting. But I love it. So I go to Quaker meeting and Methodist church now, and I just really love and get something out of both. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything. Oh, sorry. There were other things as well that I wrote down for you. Yeah. Anyway, no, just carry on. You can cut that bit.
No, this is so interesting. No,
yeah,
please,
this is really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. There were other things, but I think that's enough. But yeah. I mean, there's things like that I've experienced, like, for example, being late sometimes or forgetting things sometimes. And I have to work super hard to be organized. I'm like one of those ADHDers that is quite uber organized because I think I've kind of compensated. And sometimes as well, like too early as well, because I overcompensate. it being late. So those are the other things I wrote down, and just things like that, where it's a bit embarrassing in my job if I turn up to a church and I've like forgotten things, or it can happen. So I have to be quite organized, write a list, write everything down.
Yeah, but I think that is something that especially like my friends and family members with ADHD do struggle with, especially as they get older, because I feel like when you're a younger person, it's more acceptable to sort of be a bit chaotic and not have your life together and be forgetting things or like late to things. But then as you get older, you're expected to be sort of a professional, and it
Yeah.
does be, yeah, like it becomes a bit embarrassing to be like, yes, I am an adult and I am fully capable of running my own life, but also I will forget things if I don't make a list.
Yeah, and I came across a brilliant resource actually that I might just mention now while we're on it, which is aimed at workplaces, but is actually brilliant for anyone to read. And I've put it on our miscellaneous resources page on our website, and it's called ADHD UK Welfare Pack for ADHD at Work Welfare Pack for employers and ADHD employees. And there's a phrase in that I picked up on and I thought it was brilliant. It's something like familiarity breeds contempt. So the fact that some people recognize that they sometimes make certain kind of not mistakes, but like they sometimes are late, or they sometimes forget things, or it makes them think that you're just kind of not very clever, or you're just kind of lazy, or you're not as good as other people at certain things, when actually you're like, it's not this. When you have ADHD, it's like 10, 20 times harder, those things. It's not just that it's not like a neurotypical person being late occasionally or like struggling with time or struggling with remembering stuff. I'm terrible at remembering stuff. I have really, really bad working memory, which is quite an ADHD thing. I've always wondered why. And now I know. If I don't write things down, I just forget them. And, in my working life, people have got quite frustrated with me, especially when I didn't know I had ADHD. Because they would say, I told you this the other day, and I was like, what? I have no idea what you're on about. I just literally have not focused, or I have not written it down and I've forgotten. Yeah, so that's quite a struggle. But I'd recommend that resource. So yeah, you can find that on like I say, on the miscellaneous resources page.
Awesome. We will try and find that and put a link to it in this when we post it. Yeah, I also thought it was really interesting how you talked about like sensory things with loud church, because that's one of the things that I really struggle with as somebody who is autistic and like really struggles with noise as like my sort of worst sensory thing. Like I can't go to a church that has that worship style. And yeah, I think that has always been a thing for me, that like a lot of my friends were like, but this is cool young people church. Like, why don't you want to come? Why do you want to be in boring old people church? Like,
yeah, and you end up kind of actually getting along really well with older people, because you end up just being in spheres where older people are, because you like actually you just don't really fit in the loudness of it all. And the thing is that a lot of young people do gravitate and love those kinds of churches, and there is a real need for those churches to be inclusive, because of young people needing all sorts of worship and some people really loving that. So you do get a lot, like you get a lot of groups of young people in churches that are really have kind of vibrant or whatever loud worship. Like some people see it as vibrant, some people might see it as loud. And that attracts a lot of people. But then they realize down the line, and this is part of your Honest Church campaign, isn't it, that it's actually like homophobic, transphobic, not inclusive at all, but they haven't really said. And you've been there a year and you've got your friends there, and it's really, really hard to extricate yourself. So that's not fair. So we need those churches, like some of them, to stand up and be inclusive. But we also need to recognise there are some young people like when I was younger and like you that just don't get on with that really. And you kind of force yourself to, because you think that's what everyone should be doing when they're younger. So I think this whole conversation about neurodivergence is really important to be having. because it means that we can understand that not everyone is the same. And there's a need for different churches, different styles. I remember I wrote a blog actually, which is, I now look back and it's quite funny. Before I knew I had ADHD, I wrote a blog years ago, which you can probably search for. If you type introvert into the search bar on the Inclusive Church website, you'll find a blog I wrote about being an introvert. And when I look back, I then wrote a later blog about being diagnosed with ADHD, which you can also find. And I was like, oh, some of those things that I wrote about is actually probably just because I have ADHD. So I was writing about being kind of finding it quite a sanctuary to be in a friend's house in Euston, because I find London so loud, honestly, it's so much noise, it's just unreal. I live in quite a quiet part of Birmingham, which is quite nice. It's the south part. But yeah, even going into central Birmingham, I find it a bit overwhelming, to be honest. And so whenever I have to go to London for work, I just find it really overwhelming. And I was kind of sitting writing this blog in a friend's house in Euston, and I was talking about how it was really nice and quiet in there, although I was even struggling with just the kind of clanging of the cutlery in the cafe and stuff. That was already kind of making me lose focus. So yeah, noise is one I struggle with as well. There have been times, like I said to you before we started recording, Grace, where I'm like, my wife will be playing something and then she'll be talking to, like in the car, she'll be playing music, she'll be talking to me as well. And Brendan, my son in the back, will be also like screaming something or talking nonsense. And I will be like, just suddenly I'll just get to that point where I don't realize it's coming. And then I'm like, and switch the radio off. And my wife's like, what's going on? You know, but that's just overwhelm. Sometimes it just kind of is like a kettle. It just gets to boiling point. Yeah. So yeah, it's hard to identify it when it's building. Like really, I find it really hard to identify the building bit before it gets to the.
Yeah. I can get that way too, but instead of being mad, I will just like burst into hysterical tears, which is alarming for everyone around me. Especially like if I'm in a public space, like if I'm in a church service, that tends to really freak people out. Especially because if you go to a more traditional church, then everybody's very concerned because, you know, it's a bunch of very like stoic older British people who are like, how dare you show emotion in public? And if you're at like a more modern church, especially one that's a bit like more like Pentecostal, very like spirit-led kind of thing, then they're like, what's God saying to you? Why are you crying? And you're like, no, it's too loud.
It's just too loud. Yeah. I also get the meltdown crying as well. Sometimes I get the one and then the other. Sometimes I will identify that I'm feeling really, really anxious, and I'll be like, Ellie, I just need to go upstairs. And then I'll go upstairs out of sight and I will just cry for a bit and then feel it's like your brain resets. I don't know if it's the same with autism, but with ADHD, it's like a reset of your brain. It's really strange. And I always just thought I was ridiculously immature and over emotional. And now I know it's an ADHD thing. You know, this, what do they call it? Oh, I can't remember. There's a term for it. But yeah, it's gone out of my head now. But this kind of the way that you, have big emotions, and it's really hard to control them. And sometimes the crying helps because it resets your brain and then you feel kind of calm again. It's just a bit weird. But I don't like to alarm my son, you know, so I'll like go out of the way and then have a bit of a cry and then feel a bit better and then go back down. But it's okay because my wife and I, we have different conditions. My wife isn't disabled in a way in a big umbrella as well because she's got long-term mental health condition. So she's got on and off depression and has had all her life since she was a teenager. So we're both very empathetic. So when she needs to also have a moment and have some time to herself, she also can do that. So that's the gift actually of kind of empathy when you have, when you're friends or in a relationship with someone who also has something going on, a difference.
I have that. My partner is diabetic, so it's a chronic illness disability rather than anything else. But like there's also times when he just can't do things because he's like, I can't I have to sit down now because if my blood sugar drops any lower, I will actually die. Like, and like we just have to stop whatever we're doing and wait until he's okay again, which was really helpful for me in a relationship to like not have or to have it be okay for me to also be like, I need to go home now. Like I'm too overwhelmed. I need to go home now. So yeah, that I think what you're saying about having a partner who understands is really important. Yeah.
She does think I mean, she uses the word mad for herself, so I'm not trying to be like rude about this, but she does think I'm a bit bonkers, let's say, sometimes because of my like not just hyper focus on sound and overwhelmed with sound, but hyper focus on smell. That's one of mine as well. If I smell something, especially if it's bad, I will not stop until I find the root of that smell because it's just I completely hyper focus on it. So I think to the outside world, it looks a bit weird. And he's like, I can't smell anything, just stop. What are you on about? And I'm like, no, it's just awful. And then when I find it, I'm like vindicated because I'm like, yes, there was this smell and it was coming from here. Oh dear, it's funny.
Yeah. I think that might sort of segue into our next question about how can churches and student groups better support their members with additional needs, especially around neurodiversity. And can we sort of try and come up with a list of like general do's and don'ts or things to be aware of? I know that's kind of a big ask because obviously like people with different types of neurodivergence have different needs. But
yeah, well, you can probably feed in as well there. I mean, one of the most important things I think, and it's the same for all disabled people, is for communication, clear communication before you get to the church, as well as once you're in the church. So telling people what the service is like on the website, telling people what the building is like, yeah, all sorts of stuff like that is really helpful. And communication with the people as well, not like asking intrusive questions, because asking questions and being curious about people is really good unless you're being like rudely curious. I'm sure you know the difference. But asking questions like that are about you learning and doing better as a church, like how can we kind of include you better, and is there anything, you know, like open questions, is there anything that you need, is there anything that you would like us to do better, things like that. That's respectful questions. Yeah, not like what's wrong with you, I don't know, you know, some people can ask horrible questions, can't they, to any disabled people, but yeah, respectful, good questions is yeah, having communication with the people that are there. Realizing, I think one of the biggest things is that you accept as a church, because this is really like hard in society, I find generally, accept as a church and just in general in your daily life that people are not all the same and don't act as if they should be. And I think that you come across it, like schools are getting better and I hope churches are getting better, but I noticed that, for example, you know, as my son navigates nursery and stuff, they're trying to be very helpful. The nursery is very good in general. They understand different children and SEN and everything. But you know, like my son, he might not have any SEN or any neurodivergence, but he does struggle to focus. He is extremely boisterous, and you do feel like almost that they want to diagnose him in order for him to be able to fit better in a box at school. I know that's not the intent. I know that what they want to do is to help him to get on in school if he has got anything, and that's really nice of them. But it still irks me that people have to be diagnosed in order to get on because everyone is basically otherwise put in this box. It's this kind of like your kind of mainstream, you know, mainstream education is such a difficult thing, really. I think it has improved, but it's like, it's just the world is set up for certain people, isn't it? And I think that that's what we should work on in our churches, is to not assume that everyone is the same, to not kind of expect everyone to be there on time, because you don't know whether that person has a condition that means they've got what is termed time blindness. I don't know how, how good that is a term, but yeah, and other things like that. So just being aware that people experience the world in very radically different ways, and that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Naomi.
No, I just wanted to jump in, and the thing that you said about buildings as well. So presumably you mean that can be sort of general accessibility, so if they have ramps and if everything's sort of on one level. But I was wondering, as neurodivergent people, if there's kind of aspects of certain types of buildings that you find if it's sort of too big or too small, or if there's anything like that is included, just out of curiosity, really.
It's a really weird one, and it's come up actually when I've been speaking to people in churches, and they don't quite know how to handle it. But some of us, we struggle with overwhelming welcome. Do you know what I mean by that, Grace?
Yeah, I think I do.
Struggle with that. Yeah, I love friendliness, but when it's like everyone pounces on you, I find that really overwhelming. So maybe people could think about in churches, because I know they're trying really hard to be inclusive and welcoming, and that's where it comes from, a place of a real nice place. But I do find it quite overwhelming if there's more than one person that approach me all at once, and I don't even know that church. That's quite a lot. So I think there's something there about maybe just having like one person welcoming. So because it can be quite a lot. Like I just think being in a new place is quite scary anyway. So definitely like having somebody welcome you is nice, because that makes you feel like not so much trepidation about being in a completely new space and all that. But I think there's like an opposite end, isn't there, of having way too many people welcome you, which I've experienced before.
I think for me, like really big churches, like again, like I would probably never go to like a mega church just because like that's way too many people for me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, even trying to have a conversation in like a busy space where there's lots of people talking in the background is really hard for me. Especially if it's with somebody I don't know very well, because I just genuinely can't hear them. And it's not that my ears don't work, because my hearing is fine, actually. It's because like my brain can't process that one noise because it's too busy processing all of the other noises around me at once, and I can't focus.
We have that in common for sure, because I always thought it was just because I was distracted. It might be with ADHD that I'm distracted. I'm so distracted by all the excess stuff in the background that it is really hard to hear people. It's true, when it's very noisy.
Yeah, but then I feel bad because I'm like, I'm a young person and I should be able to hear you.
It's like you say, it's a processing thing rather than an actual hearing loss thing. But yes, it is really hard. Yeah, and I also find like churches that are just way too many people. It's not even the size of the church, because you can be in a big cathedral space and you just go into a small bit for the service, and that's okay. It's the overwhelming amount of people that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, it's so bad not being able to hear people. Especially, I feel really bad saying this, but like people with regional accents in the UK that I'm not familiar with because I didn't grow up here. If someone has an accent that I'm not familiar with, it's so hard to understand them if there's like lots of background noise. But then I feel really bad because like I'm the foreigner, but also even stuff that I normally like wouldn't have a problem understanding, I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. I can't process this.
So maybe that's another thing for churches to remember, is that people might ask, can we kind of talk in a quieter bit of the church or something, and to not be weirded out by that request, because it genuinely be that we can't process the sound, like we can't hear.
I think just in general, potentially not being weirded out by people like asking for things that might be a little unusual, or by people doing things like, I mean, if you're autistic, I know ADHD people also stim, but like stimming is a really big part of emotional regulation if you're autistic.
That's the term I was looking for earlier.
Yeah.
Emotional dysregulation is a thing with ADHD.
Yeah. So like sort of being okay with autistic people potentially like moving about more in services, or like also just the fact that some people are going to respond to like good or bad news by doing things with their bodies that a neurotypical person thinks is really weird.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, like being okay with that and being a safe place for people to do that where they don't have to mask, I think is a really big thing for churches and for student groups.
Yeah, because I think growing up, like we feel we're so used to people making us feel like we're really weird and odd. And actually, that's what people used to term autistic and like neurodivergent people. Oh, he's odd, he's eccentric, she's weird or whatever. It's just how it's seen, and yeah, just to be aware that actually we're just different. It's not. We don't need to kind of react to people when they're doing certain things in like a kind of drawing attention to them being different kind of. It's different, but it's not. It doesn't have to be seen as weird or something.
Yeah.
Unless it's in a good way. But yeah, I was going to say something. I've forgotten them. That's my brain, you see.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Also, like, oh, sorry. Also, like body language and stuff. With autism in particular, autistic people generally have kind of weird body language, especially if you're somebody who doesn't mask a lot or just isn't. I don't want to say isn't good at masking because it really shouldn't be something you have to be good at, but like if you don't mask as much, like sometimes you have weird issues with the tone of your voice or the volume of your voice or your body language. And I think again that comes back to what you were saying about like you have to be okay with people not being the same.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say now. I was going to say that I lived for a time in France, and when you talk about body language and people using a lot more body, like in the south of France where I used to go a lot because I had a partner that was southern French, it's a lot like Italy and Spain and like almost Middle Eastern as well. It's like they just use their body, they use their emotions a lot more. They're much more emotional and show it all on the outside. And that might be for some neurodivergent people, that might be overwhelming. But for me, I found that it actually gave me a liberation that I find I don't have in Britain because I have to mask more in Britain because British people are much more reserved. I can't be as emotional. I have to kind of rein it in because there are times it's not just the crying thing. There are times when I just want to like dance or I just want to like be like really excited, and you have to like rein it in, just whereas when I'm at home, like my son, he finds it hilarious because there'll be times when I will just be completely laughing my head off like hysterically, just can't stop giggling, and he just finds that really, really funny because he's 4. So it fits quite well with children, but like there was something, and I remember posting something recently on Facebook on my personal page, and I was like, I was sharing something about French people and like the way they just argue in public and stuff like that. I was like, okay, it's not ideal, but in some ways I find it easier. I didn't even say as someone with ADHD, I just said I personally find it easier because I kind of know where I stand. Whereas with British people, I'm always guessing. They're often more reserved. I don't know what they mean when they say stuff. I find that quite hard. And my sister, who thinks she's also got ADHD, she's not yet diagnosed, was like, "This is such a neurodivergent practice." I was like, "Oh, is it? Maybe it is. Maybe it is like to do with that." Yeah.
No, I get away with that a bit because like I am pretty obviously American. So people are just like, "Oh, you're just American. You're just like weird and emotional. Like that's just how they are over there. So I think people notice it less, which is good because I really struggled with it when I moved to the UK because I can't tell when people are being passive aggressive, which is fine actually because then I just couldn't tell that people were mad at me. Um,
I
Much
can
easier to
tell,
break.
but it drives me crazy because I'm like, why are you not just telling me straight to my face what's the problem? You know, I had this thing that went on for months with my neighbor, and I was like, he seems really angry with us, Ellie. I said, I don't know what's going on. I think I'm just going to go over there and ask straight out. And I did, and then found out that it was something to do with how we were parking. And I was okay. Yeah, passive aggressivity is a bit. Sorry, Naomi, you were going to say something, I think.
No, no, not at all. I just didn't want to interrupt this. It's really interesting just hearing both of you talk about this. Yeah, I mean, I think because um, it sounds like you have such a different way of experiencing religious spaces that maybe often people don't take into account. They often think, oh, it has to be something we have to accommodate, but actually something that we should be celebrating, and we should actually celebrating for the gifts that it is. So, I mean, I guess that was really my question. Really, is just how do you feel that your neurodiversity is a gift in religious spaces?
Yeah, I think neurodiverse, like, I just speak for myself, I guess. But I think ADHD can be a gift in terms of the way that we are creative. And I think actually it is a gift for not just ADHDers, but actually anyone that's neurodivergent and also anyone who's kind of marginalized it to a certain extent because of the way we've been marginalized and put and not allowed to do certain things sometimes. We've actually had to be creative. So although neurodivergent brains also are just more like creative because they kind of, well, my brain moves very fast, so it thinks of things sometimes that other people haven't put together and whatnot. So in that way, it's creative, and that's quite helpful in my job and in other ways. But I think in churches as well, just neurodivergent people and anyone that's marginalized is bound to be more creative in the way that they want to do things in a new way, because they're kind of often we've been forced to do things in a new way. We've been forced to like set up an LGBT church, or do you know what I mean? Like because we weren't allowed or to have that space, that mainstream space. And I think actually that is a gift of neurodivergent and all marginalized people in the church, is that we are hope. I mean, again, I'm speaking for myself, and I'm sure there are some neurodivergent people who struggle with also like things being different and changing. But I do think that sometimes the gift of marginalization is that we are open to being doing things in a different way, maybe being a creative, and that can be helpful to the church, because actually sometimes that can be how the church grows or attracts new people, or is adaptable to certain circumstances. Whereas if you don't have any of that creativity in your midst, you are just going to sit in the same pew and not be in any way, making the changes you need to make for the church to work better for everyone. But Grace might have something to say to that, because I don't know. I mean, autistic people maybe sometimes struggle with also things changing from.
I think, most autistic people do sort of broadly struggle with change, but I think it can vary a lot from person to person as to like what specific aspects of change people struggle with. So like I have some friends who really, really struggle with changes of routine or with plans. If they had planned to do something and then the plan changes, that literally will ruin their whole day. Like, if one of my friends, if she wants to get a train and the train is canceled and she has to get one tomorrow, she cannot get anything done for the rest of the day because she just has to sit there and be like, my plan didn't work. And she gets really stuck in that, and that's something that's really hard for her. Whereas for me, like that's not a problem. Like, but things that I'm like really attached to, like if somebody I'm very close to like suddenly changes their hair color, I can get really irrationally upset about it. because I'm like, the way that I had you like remembered in my brain is different from the way you look now, and that's really distressing to me. But I think on the whole, like being a catalyst for change, like you said, and being able to bring in sort of new ideas is really like the gift that all people who are different have for the church. And I think especially like for me, because the way that I sort of understand and experience different religious concepts can sometimes be quite different from the way that a neurotypical person would understand it. It can also be helpful to like ask neurodivergent people how they understand something like what do you think God is like for you? Because it can give an insight that maybe like you haven't heard of before, and it can just generally be helpful to people to sort of find new ways of like interacting with, like, I don't want to be really pretentious and say like the divine, but like it is that kind of thing, right? Yeah. I'm actually, since our last chat prior to recording this, I've started working on this blog about like sort of being autistic and learning how to pray. Because I find that like a lot of the ways that like prayer is explained in various church resources just doesn't make sense to me. And so yeah, part of the reason that I'm working on this blog is basically to be like, oh, this is not how I understand this. And trying to bring sort of a different perspective into that in the hopes that I can like help other people who, you know, whether they're neurodivergent or not, who just sort of struggle with understanding how prayer works.
And that's part of that thing that I think the theologian whose name is really, I find, because I'm not Sri Lankan, hard to pronounce, Sugir Taraja. I think that's part of what he was saying about the whole like having more people at the table, because you just get all these experiences of different people and you learn so much when you are open to that. You know, you learn different ways of praying, you learn different ways of understanding God and understanding church, and doing church differently if you have to. And it's like, it's such a gift. You know, I think too often churches think that it's like about accommodating everyone, and it's really super hard, and we've got to, what about this person, and then that other one needs this, and everyone has needs. But actually we forget that we all have needs, whether we're disabled, neurodivergent or not, and we all have gifts, and the gifts are like almost more important if we can just open our minds and see them, because the church can be so much better, be so much bigger, and learn so much more if it's just open to those gifts.
That was really lovely. I kind of want to like, I'm having such a good time talking to you, but I also kind of want to stop there because you just said something really profound.
Definitely.
But also I am kind of trying to be aware of time, and I know that we've been doing this for like 50 minutes at this point, I think. So if we're okay to wrap up, I don't know if you have anything in your notes that you want to make sure that we talk about before we sort of do conclusion stuff.
No, it's just that you wanted also to know if there was anything I wanted to point anyone to.
Yes.
So I would point people definitely to this book, which I don't know if you can see the right way around, can you?
Yeah.
Because I see it backwards on my screen. Okay, so it says At the Gates. It's a really great book. It's very recently come out by Naomi, Lawson-Jacobs and Emily Richardson, people that have been heavily involved in the disability conference with St Martin in the Fields. And it's got the experiences of disabled and neurodivergent people in there. Naomi is themselves neurodivergent as well as being disabled. And then this one is a really great one for women with ADHD, which I have on my shelves, because it's really positive about ADHD, which is really nice. So even though it's written by like medical people, it's kind of not just medical model, if you know what that means. It's social model as well. It's like discovering strengths and all that as well. So not just making like disabled people into problems or neurodivergent people into problems that need fixing. So yeah, so those are two. I would also recommend definitely going on the Inclusive Church website. So if you go on resources, miscellaneous, there's lots of stuff under there, including this ADHD at Work welfare pack I talked about, which is really, really great. And there's, if you do some searching as well through the blogs, we've got Krisha Waldock, so spelt Krysia, has written a few things which are really great because they have autism. And there's like a review of, for example, of The Upside Down Kingdom, which is another book that this person, Naomi Lawson-Jacobs, wrote based on their PhD. There's also a review about the gates in there. And there's my ADHD blog on being diagnosed with ADHD. So just search for that. And then finally, these are all the things I've tagged on my computer, on my laptop to let you know about. So the final thing is that I would go on resources disability conferences and scroll down to the one that is from 2019 called Thinking Differently About God. So there's lots of videos, also text if that's easier for you, of all the speakers and that from that year. And it's called Thinking Differently About God that year because it was about neurodiversity. So that whole year's disability conference was about neurodiversity. So well worth a look.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, great resources. And then, yeah, I guess all that's left to say is thank you so much for coming and having a chat with us. It's been really great to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
Great.